Welcome back to Young Visionary TV. I am so excited that you clicked on this video. Why? Because this is one of the first videos of the new year. Also, I got a special guest. I have one of my former teachers from 6th and 8th grade. She was my science and social studies teacher. And when I tell you, when she teaches history, it's on another level. I'm so excited. In this conversation, we're talking about my educational experience, her educational experience. But at this point in the conversation that I recorded for you, we're talking about Black History Month and what I'm doing at my school and what she's doing at her school to celebrate it. But also, we got to the point in the conversation where we started discussing the importance of including context, yes, context, when you are teaching history. So listen, I'm not gonna say anything else. We're just gonna hop in the conversation. All right, let's go.
I'm with you. I did my bulletin board, but I just don't want it to be that. And I'm glad people stop and they look and they're like, I'm glad you're doing this because nobody else is doing it. And I'm like, I know, and I appreciate that, but it can be
a conversation piece, the meat of it.
Yes.
And when I learned, when we did, that's what I was about to say. When we did the, so the boys didn't even know about the challenge yet, but I needed them to use the video later on in the challenge. Right. So before they did the challenge, I was like, okay, obviously I got to teach this really quickly. And we talked about it and I tried to find a YouTube video and I was like, all these are so boring. I hate how documentaries are. They have the longest video, black and white, and it's somebody just up there talking. But I remembered, have you seen The Butler?
Yes.
So when we were talking about this, I was like, there's a movie coming to my mind. And the guy that did the guy that helps me for GQ, he was like, The Butler. I was like, yeah, he pulled it up and we watched it. It's a scene in there, where they're training for it and everything. I was like, this is it. And they were so engaged.
Yes.
They were so like the questions. And then the first question after they saw the video of the announcement, they were like, why are you calling Black history American history? So we were able to dig deep. And then I feel like when they actually did the mannequin challenge, they put themselves in, and I have an Asian boy and then I have a white boy, and he was like, you should be the server because we're all Black. I was like, it don't even have to be like that.
Yes.
And and the Butler showed it because it was a guy in the movie training with them to go to the diner.
Right.
And I said, just like y'all saw, there were people on our side that didn't look like us. So these conversations, to kill the stereotypes, to kill the stereotypical ignorance. I'm here for like making classrooms conducive to have those questions, but and to build a better mindset for it. So I definitely think that this is going to help. What I'm trying to do is I'm going to use that movie clip to put into the Flipgrid. I just got to mute it because I didn't realize they really said the N-word. And I forgot. I had another teacher in the room. I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have showed this. But GQ already knows how it is, so it's good.
Well, and the thing is too, and this one is like, it's like with the teacher going, well, they shouldn't watch Glory because it's rated R. I'm like, like I think there's a difference between not talking about stuff because it makes us uncomfortable, and there's a difference between sanitizing history because we don't want to talk about this kind of stuff, and then showing it like it is within the context of a conversation.
Because I would hate for you to find out what history is when it's being used against you.
Correct. Correct. Like my example with this is I always talk about Thomas Jefferson, right? Because when I was little, Thomas Jefferson was my favorite president. He is the one that we get the separation of church and state from because of his work within the Virginia House of Representatives, like the Virginia state government. He kind of pushed that through. He was an architect. When you go to his house in Monticello, like it's beautiful. And he did a lot of establishment for the University of Virginia and funding higher education. And he's always the one that I reference when I get an earful about how the founding fathers were a bunch of Christian dudes and they founded this country on Christian principles. And I reference him because when you go and see his Bible at Monticello, he cut out with almost like an X-Acto type knife everywhere that Jesus said that he was the Son of God, because he said Jesus was such a good man, he would not have lied like that. So there's that part of Thomas Jefferson that we don't really talk about. And then there's all the stuff that we don't talk about, right, with our little friends that he had, you know, on the side and everything else. And so, and I told my students this week, because we were talking about him, and I said, it's double, right? We have this great guy who did all these great things, who was an eloquent writer. My gosh, his writing was just very admirable. But then we have this other side of him. We have this relationship that was completely inappropriate. The fact that he owned other people was another level of inappropriate, but let's just focus on the relationship a minute. And we talked about that and everything. And I said, you know, to this day, the Jefferson Foundation doesn't really want to acknowledge the descendants from Sally Hemings. Like that's still an issue, even though we have the DNA to prove that. I said, but it's also complicated. I said, let's talk about what's complicated. And here's another one that I didn't learn until I was an adult. You ready for this history? Here you go, Rodney. So Jefferson was married, right? And he was married to his wife. Most of the slaves he owned came from her family. She was very rich. Father-in-law was very rich. She died pretty, like, not too long after they were married. Like, you know, she died rather young. Okay, so because by the time late 30s, early 40s, he was single again because she had died. You ready for this? Sally Hemings was his wife's half-sister. They looked alike. They looked alike because the wife's father had a relationship with a slave woman, and from that relationship came Sally Hemings.
Shut your mouth.
So there's the part, because I want to believe there's a little bit of an inkling of a person in there. There's a part of that I wonder if Jefferson's attraction to her wasn't partly because she looked so much like the wife that he had loved very dearly. And like everybody knew that he loved very dearly because she looked a lot like him, a lot like her. But the other part of that was that, one, she was a slave, so she had no choice in the matter. Two, she was significantly younger than he was. Like, I want to say it's like a 20-year age gap between the two of them. And three, that even, you know, going into her life and everything else, like, he still technically owned her and he still technically owned their children. But it's complicated. Yes. And when you start talking to people about all that, everybody gets like real quiet and everything else because they don't want to talk about that because they're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. But I'm like, you've got to talk about all that because he was so important to American history. He was so very important, but that doesn't mean he was perfect. And that doesn't mean he was without his faults.
That part, oh my gosh, it lets you know that he was human. Correct.
And so what I get really upset when I hear all these guys valorize the founding fathers and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, y'all don't know your history. And like I said, when they throw the, you know, we're a Christian nation, you know, Christian values and all that other sort of thing, I'm like, Jefferson wasn't. Washington was a deist. And my analogy for this is deism is the belief that, like, it's like God holding a pocket watch with the chain coming down and the earth is the clock and it kind of goes independently, but God is kind of holding the chain up here, but there's not a lot of connection between this and this.
Got you.
So he believed that there was a God, but it was not a God that was very involved or anything like that. And so, like I said, when you hear all this, the founding fathers, da, da, da. Ready? Here's another history. I'm such the history teacher. I have to tell you this stuff. So January 6th, when the whole, like, we lost our mind at the Capitol thing happened, right? And my husband was doing some research and everything else and going down some YouTube rabbit holes. And here's an interesting thing for you. He thinks, as do a lot of these other, like, constitutional scholars and everything else, that the right to bear arms was perhaps established in the Constitution in fear of an uprising of slaves. That local people would have to arm themselves against an outside force to protect their homes. So then does that context of the right to bear arms for that reason, then how do you apply that in today's standards of, do you really need that AK-47? And let's talk about where the right came from for you to even have that gun.
Context matters. Context matters.
Correct.
Context matters. That it doesn't shock me. It just it makes it enhances
right. It enhances your understanding of history. And that's what I tell my kids when we talk about stuff. It's like, you've gotta there's always more to the story.
You gotta put yourself.
We're very base bones with stuff, right? And we're very like, well, this was this and this was this and yada da da da. But it's like, no, there was other stuff going on. There was definitely more to the story. And that's why history, I think, and that's why I love it. And that's why I love teaching it. And, you know, and we'll stop in class and I'm like, okay, put your pencils down and just let me talk to you for a second, because the stuff I'm going to tell you isn't in the standards and you don't have to know it for the test, but I just want you to know it because I think it's good for you to know this stuff.
Yeah.
So you get it.
I remember you told us about Martin Luther King having a baby out of wedlock, but nobody ever talks about it. And nobody really found out about it until she wrote about it. I think she wrote about it in her book, didn't she?
I think so.
And then the more that I began to study, that's why when they bugged his room, that's what they found out. But nobody ever talked about that.
Correct.
And then I realized I admire that, one, because me being a Christian and growing up on these stories, we talk about, you know, let's just say, don't have sex, don't do all this. But you go back in the Bible, David was a man after God's own heart, but David was a hoe. David was out here.
Oh, big time.
He was out here running the streets. Like, So, but until you know the context of the text and understanding the culture of that time, you won't really understand the people. Like, we make it seem like it's fairy tale, but like, you got to know the context to know what's going on. And I think that's what, I'm not gonna say I think, that's what's happening with history, especially with our kids today. When we're looking at the inauguration and everybody's like, this is amazing, but you have kids like, okay, what's up with all the first? Like, she's a Black woman. But we gotta realize they were born when Obama was in office. So like, all this history,
they don't remember the struggle. They don't.
It's absent to them.
Correct.
And
the context of the struggle is missing and everything. Oh, I know.
We're living in a time where things are open. We're more, which is good. Like, you know, like this generation is more accepting.
Correct.
Millennials.
I have seen more this year rainbow attire at school than I've ever seen. And it's not as big of a,
and that's across all races also.
Correct. Like it's not as big of a to-do as it has been in years before. Because I mean, I had an 8th grader, Holly, what was that? 4 years ago, maybe, come out at the end of social studies class. And I was like,
a day in history.
Like, you know, and he just kind of let it fly. And then it was like time to go to the next class. And I'm like, whoa. And the kids are like, whoa. And I'm like, whoa. But like now, I feel like for some kids, it's not such a public coming out. It's, I'm going to wear these things. I'm going to wear these colors. I'm going to express my identity in this way. And then you just know what it is. It is what it is. And that's a different than even when you were growing up, of huge understanding of identity and how everything works, that kids now feel the comfort and support right within the structure of the school to say, I can wear this thing and it's okay.
And even with that openness, it still leaves an area of ignorance when it comes to history. Because like I said, they don't understand the struggle. So like, they're living in freedoms that they never fought for and that they don't even know that they have.
Correct. it's such a hard thing because I taught it with Gandhi, and then, here pretty soon we're going to go into the civil rights movement with my 8th graders. When they see nonviolent protests, particularly my Black male students, have such a hard time, right? Because we, as a culture, I think really reinforce the necessity of their masculinity, that you're not going to say something to me, you're not going to do anything that would ever question that.
It's so good.
Yeah. So looking at these people just taking it is against everything I understand about who I am.
Yeah.
And how can we look back at that history? And I do think this sometimes. How can we, as Black men, look back at that history and be proud of that, because they just took it and we would never take it like that. And I tell them, well, you would never take it like that because they did. Like they set the course for you so that you now have the right to stand up and say, you can't talk to me that way, you can't treat me this way, and I'm not going to put up with it.
We literally had this conversation Friday, one of the boys, when we was watching the movie. And he was like, just to be honest, I would have had to fight back. And I said, you now, yes. You then, no. Like, there was a whole different system in action.
Correct.
There was a whole, I was like, we're proving, the whole point of it was to prove unity, 1. 2, yes. If we act like they expect us to act, what does that prove?
Yes.
I was like, so you got to, we were more goal oriented then. So we knew what we were outset to do. And then you got to realize just systems were different then, like how people parent, how
I tell them that, like, when you grow up within a mindset of something that it just, I here lately, I've been telling them, I get the question a lot as a history teacher, when in history, if you could go back and live in any time, what time would you want to live in? And I'm like, now. Like, are you kidding? Now? Yeah. Like, because given what time in history I go to, I don't have the right to own property. I don't have the right to walk. Yeah, there you go. Walk down the street by myself. I don't have the right to speak my mind. I don't have the right to vote. And I'm a white person. So ask a Black person that and see how many are be like, yep, the 1940s sound great. Like, no. I mean, and yeah, there are interesting things in history. It would be interesting to watch this. It would be interesting to be in the crowd.
And come back.
Yes, at Gettysburg and that sort of thing. But I tell them all the time, I say, I like air conditioning way too much. I like the ability to wear pants and to have pockets way too much. I like the ability to, if I don't have to wear makeup, if I don't want to do my hair, like I can do that. And
the thing, and that's what not only Black History, but Women's History Month is about to hit different.
Yeah, I was gonna tell you, I think with your momentum of your Black History Month, if you think about rolling that into Women's History Month there too, like, I think that would be really powerful and everything else, because that's another one. Like,
you cannot look at the inauguration and just be like, for J-Lo to sing the song, "This Is My Land," while we have people at the border locked up.
Correct.
For her to get in, for Kamala to be just brought in by the very first Supreme Court justice, a woman of color, it's something.
Yeah.
I said, like, it's not being spoken, but like, we're living in a time where you just like, we're watching history. Like,
correct.
And like, ooh, it's just gonna hit different.
And it's hard because you're right, because for kids, well, this is their reality. So why should this be this momentous big thing that it is to you and I? Because I remember when Barack Obama was elected, and oh my gosh, how excited were we, because this is finally a first and everything else. And like, for our kids now, it's like,
it's just another.
Okay. Yeah, it's just like, because when you think about it, so Obama was elected, he served for 8 years. Trump just finished his 8 years. We have 6th graders that were born during Barack Obama's presidency.
A whole life.
And for you and I, that was like, groundbreaking, revolutionary. For them, it was, I mean, I don't really know why you're talking like, okay, Miss Waddell.
Which shows the necessity of a good teacher of engagement. If I never showed that video on Friday, they would have never got it. If we never stood in the seats of the mannequin challenge and told them, oh, he can be one of y'all, or he doesn't, like they had to. I'm a big fan of teaching through simulations.
Yes, yes.
And
but, and you know what I'm going to say? Like, we don't need to all go outside and go to the cotton field.
We're not going there.
We're not doing that simulation.
If I had to teach it, no.
Not that simulation. No, we're not doing that one.
No.
So yes, I feel you on the simulations, but within reason, within common sense of like
bringing that feeling to the classroom. That's that attire that I feel like needs to be in the classroom where you can feel it, where you know it's something tangible, and this isn't just something that's we're talking about or that's written on paper.
Right. And see, my thing with films, let's see if you remember this one. Let's see, because I do believe I showed it to you. There was this movie that I stumbled over randomly called The Wave. And I showed it to you guys, and it was about a school, because we were talking about the Nazis, and it was about a school where a history teacher instituted the wave and got all the kids to do the wave. And by the end of it, the history teacher was like, y'all questioned how Hitler made everybody Nazis, but what did I just do to you?
No.
And y'all all looked at me like, Miss Waddell, what? And I was like, well, you know, because it's that thing. How in the world could people support this? How in the world could people go along with it? Well, when it's layered within, right? It's like when racism is institutional, when, you know, certain structures are just the way it is, that we support this group more than this group. And, you know, when that's just the way that it is, it's harder to look at that and say, you know, that's not really fair. That's not really.
That's good.
You know, equality and equity and all that other stuff. Because it is. That's always a hard one for kids to grasp, is how in the world could people support this thing? How in the world could people go along with this thing? Same thing with the civil rights movement. How in the world can you look at people and say, it's okay that we do this to them? And when you've been brainwashed that people aren't people, and people aren't equal to you, and people don't have the right to certain things. I tell you another one that I want you to watch if you haven't watched it already. Have you seen on Netflix the trial of the seven?
From New York?
Yeah, from Chicago.
Yeah, yes. And
have you seen the movie?
Okay, so I couldn't make it through the whole movie. Are we talking about the one that the Central? Hold on, I'm talking about two different ones.
I'm not talking about Central Park.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't.
I'm not listen, I couldn't get through that one either. I was so depressed and I was like, I can't handle this.
Just couldn't take it. Okay.
I couldn't do it. No, there is one on Netflix, and John and I just watched it not that long ago, and it's like the trial of the seven or something. It's got Sacha Baron Cohen in it. It's got it's about the trial of seven men. During it was in the summer, I think, of '63 in Chicago during the Democratic Convention, and they were protesting the Vietnam War, and it was during the Civil Rights Movement and all that other sort of thing. And it was 6 white guys and 1 black guy. And to watch that history as an American, and to watch how they were treated and how one of them in particular was treated. Like John and we're like, this has got to be Hollywood. This can't be real. Oh no, it was real. It was real. So that, Rodney, is your history teacher. It's still my assignment and my homework for you is I want you to go and watch this movie and tell me what you think about it. Because again, and this is another thing I love about history, is there's so many layers and there are things that I always learn.
Yeah.
Right? Things I always learn. Here's another one for you. Somewhere in time in my adulthood, I read a book. And it was a historical fiction book about Moses, okay? And Moses's wife, Zipporah. And how about I didn't realize until in adulthood, because this never got talked about in Sunday school, that Zipporah was black.
Yes!
Because she was from Nubia. Because of course she was, because that's a country in Africa and all this other sort of thing. And perhaps that wasn't a reason that people had such a hard time with her. And eventually in the Bible, she just kind of like disappears. You know, she just kind of like isn't part of the story anymore. And I was like, how groundbreaking, mind-blowing is it for not all these white Christians that Moses, you know, because heaven forbid, we all know that Jesus was white. That's first off, right? So let's be real clear about that. That Moses had a black wife. And what does that do to your arguments about marrying outside of your race? And then what does that then lead to the conversations that race is just a social construct in the first place?
What does that do to our whole history of white Christians treating?
I know.
Read your Bible, people.
I'm telling you. But it's that thing of like I said, like all these little details that you learn along the way that you go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, and it's like, yeah. Because you're fed this narrative that is this deep, when history is this deep, and things are such more complicated, but they don't want you to know this. They just want you to know this part, right?
Because people aren't expecting you to read. Mm-hmm. Which is why that's a necessity. That education is just, you know, true education, is real. Mm-hmm. When my pastor told me that we were in a meeting, I was like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. Like,
wait, what? Yeah, I do a lot of that. Wait, what? What?
History, history is just, first of all, I think people should, I'm not going to say not honor those that are in history, but bring it down so you can understand it.
Mm-hmm. I think when you talk about, and this was my point when I talked to you guys about Jefferson and with Martin Luther King, is when we put people on a pedestal and you make them, and you take away all the things that make them human and make them less human and more of a hero and all that other sort of thing. I think sometimes kids look at that and go, I could never do that because I could never be that good.
The dream doesn't become tangible at that moment. Correct.
But it's that I can't do that because, I mean, look how perfect he was and I'll never be that perfect. Well, it's not, you know, he wasn't perfect. You know, he still did great things, but he wasn't perfect and he made mistakes and all this other sort of deal. And I mean, you can go and be just as great and go do all that stuff too.
And telling his story of his faults doesn't make him any less great. And Correct. It doesn't, and it's not our intentions to devalue him. It's Correct. Our intention to build you up because Correct. He was human and to help you know that it's tangible.
Yes.
You're teaching, ma'am. You're teaching.